What are some of your thoughts on inheritance tax and being taxed at death?
Yeah, I think it's a controversial topic, right? I think especially in the UK, it's really talked about a lot. My personal opinion is that I think it's a tax that shouldn't exist, or if it does exist, it should be reserved for a extremely high level of wealth that's being left at death. I think we were talking about this earlier, right? 325k with a potential to go up to 500k if it's your home residence. Most people are brought into that at the moment.
Yeah, I guess with like the frozen allowances, thresholds, we've not seen it move, and a lot of people nowadays are being brought under inheritance tax. And is that fair? And separately as well, some of the changes around farms does make it seem like it's not actually fair to most people who now qualify for inheritance tax. And I think those that are extremely wealthy might have more of that flexibility, have advisors, etc., who might be able to move things around and are able to escape some of the pitfalls of inheritance tax.
Yeah, I don't know if it's one that I would scrap entirely, but you've mentioned there like the kind of stealth tax thing, which I think we'll talk about in some other areas. But the fact that the rates have stayed the same for so long, like Eamon said, it's bringing people into the scope of IHT that wouldn't kind of otherwise have been in it before. And one thing we were chatting about was the US, like the rate for the US is, or the threshold for people paying inheritance tax in the US is something like $13 million. So, you know, you can clearly see there's a different attitude to it in the US. I'd certainly make some basic changes to it, but it is controversial, isn't it? It's a tricky one.
No, agreed. I'm glad you also mentioned stealth taxes. It's always a big topic at the moment with inflation, frozen thresholds, I believe at the moment till 2028.
Yeah. So I think you guys know this is one I'm passionate about, fiscal drag. So, and for the benefit of people watching, right, so the fiscal drag is where the rates, the personal allowance is kind of frozen by the government for a set period of time. So it's currently £12,500 roughly. I think you said 2028. There's a lot of talk about in the new budget, the thresholds being frozen again. And what that effectively does is people that are kind of getting pay rises, obviously for their hard work, but in line with inflation as well, those pay rises are kind of dragging people into higher rates and stuff like that. The rates are not going up at the same rate, which means kind of basically sucks a lot of people into kind of the higher rate bands and stuff like that. So I really do feel that, you know, there shouldn't be another freeze, and really there's all sorts of reasons why, but the government should be looking at least kind of increasing the personal allowance and the rate bands a little bit is my view.
Yeah, makes sense. I hear that Reform UK are planning to increase the personal allowance up to 20k. What's your thoughts on that?
I think it would obviously grab the headlines, right? It's a really positive move for the papers. I think people would be interested and want that to happen. Whether it's the right exact amount, who knows? I would definitely support a large increase to the personal allowance. I think everything happening at the moment in with the Labour government and the changes being made, it's not actually helping working people. It's actually making it worse off for them, right? Because the people who aren't earning enough money aren't affected anyway, but those who have been in a career for maybe a few years in that kind of 40 to 60k range, which is a lot of people, they're getting worse off year on year, and it seems like they're the ones that's always hit by these taxes, right? They're the ones that are caught by, as you mentioned, going into the 40% tax rate, etc. So any small changes make a really big impact on the net income, right, of someone on these kind of wages. So I think it would be great to increase the allowance. So for once, all those people who are actually in that kind of working environment and earning just over the average UK salary, which is a lot of people, for once actually get a benefit and see more money in their pocket.
That makes sense. I think for reference, when we did an analysis on this, the 12,570 tax-free allowance, if it was adjusted in line with inflation, should be sitting around £16,000 at the moment.
Yeah.
With the reported rates of inflation.
Yeah.
It's just a cheap way for the government to basically increase taxes, right? And they seem to do it at every budget. The freeze gets from what I can see, it just gets extended every time, basically.
Yeah, it's quite an easy way to increase taxes without actually kind of putting anything forward or that announcement of increasing taxes.
I think there's a lot of people that don't really realise that it's happening to them until maybe you're kind of really sort of directly impacted by it, and maybe you're way above that 40%, that threshold of 50k. I think it can sting a lot of people.
The government's argument would always be that they then have to cut spending elsewhere, right? Because obviously if they were to increase the allowances, I think I was reading, I don't know if it was the 16k or the 20k figure, but increasing that personal allowance will cost over 50 billion pounds because of it's almost affecting all workers. Yeah. So if you then give them, let's say an increased allowance of £5,000 and everyone's saving 20%, that's £1,000 a person. And if there's like 20 or 30 million working people that are affected, it's huge money. So then their counter argument is, okay, we have to cut something, we have to cut spend, or it increases
that cost. Though surely they're gonna have to take the hit on that cost at some point, right?
Oh yeah,
because you can't keep the bans there forever. So that cost is going to be, it's either going to be now or in 2 or 3 years' time. It will still be a massive cost.
And I guess the argument is also by restricting thresholds and allowances, you're incentivizing people to not work as hard, to not kind of go for those increased pay rises, increased responsibility. And I think that we see that a lot, especially at like the 100k mark, as people enter the 60% tax trap, as people start to lose their vouchers in terms of childcare, or even at the 50 to 60k mark for the child benefit.
Yeah, exactly. The 100k is one we see all the time, right? For that kind of personal allowance being lost, every £2 over 100k, you lose £1. And we were all talking earlier, right, around is it worth going over the 100k? Like if someone comes to you and you have a child, etc., and you're earning 100k and you get offered a 10k bonus, if you lose the allowances and then you're taxed with if you have student loan, etc., at 70%, sometimes you make no difference in your net pay, what actually comes to your pocket. And I think a system that's set up that's even possible is insane.
It shouldn't be a question.
It shouldn't be,
if you get offered a 10k bonus or a pay rise, taking you kind of above that 100k threshold, it shouldn't even be a debate in your head, really, should it? But it is, because of the way that things are like set up.
Yeah, I think we calculated it, right? It was around 107k. If you went from 99 to 107k, it's then worth it. But if you had your childcare vouchers taken out, a pay rise in between isn't actually worth it.
Yeah, which is crazy. And you see at all levels at the moment within the UK, like you were saying, around the personal allowance at the lower level, people deciding to go back to work if they've been off for a long time, for example. And a lot of people, and you see as well, that we've had it a lot around, actually, I'll go back to work just for 16 hours or something like that, because when I go over 16 hours, I lose. These metrics need to be checked, that there should never be a cost of going to work and earning more. You should always be incentivized to earn money and get pay rises, and
100%. And I think that also impacts people that want to stay in the UK, because those skilled workers at those kind of levels, the 50, 60, up to 100k, they might be thinking, I could go elsewhere, I could move country, I could earn a lot more without facing that kind of disparity in just earning an extra 10k but being worse off.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we're seeing that now, right? I know it's all in the news, etc., of how many people are leaving the UK and going overseas, but we're seeing it at that higher level. If people have the ability to do so, let's say they work remotely, they have a job in technology, or their skills are transferable to other countries, more and more people are packing their bags and choosing to leave.
How would you incentivize people to stay in the UK?
Well, I think it goes right back to that point we were just mentioning. For example, the 60%, 70% traps need to be scrapped. Like, you shouldn't be hit so hard once you earn those kind of levels. Again, with a fiscal drag, maybe that 100k, fair enough if you want to start taking the personal allowance away, but maybe do it at 150.
So I think I read somewhere actually that the personal allowance threshold hasn't been moved since 2010. So that 100k mark at 2010 obviously is a significant amount of money, but now 15 years on, 15 years of compounded inflation and it's not the same as it was.
It's funny because HMRC, as we know, have increased the threshold for actually filing a tax return, right? So obviously this is to do with the tax rates, but historically you would only need to actually file a tax return and for other reasons, right? But if you're a PAYE employee, the threshold was always 100k, but HMRC have increased that now to 150, which shows that they know, right, at least to some degree, that 100k it's not the same as like, you know, what it was.
So they've reduced their admin and phone calls they've got to deal with, but not changed the actual cost.
They increased it to 150 and then they scrapped it entirely.
So no threshold.
No threshold.
Really?
Wow.
I mean, it shows how much we should know that, really, shouldn't we? But,
yeah, and then sneakily they reduced the 45% tax, so you actually start paying it on 125 now.
Which I think is super harsh.
So they've gone the other way.
It's gone backwards.
Yeah. Which is insane.
Yeah. And we were speaking about this, weren't we? And I think they did that like pretty quietly, the way they kind of reduced that rate, that threshold where you start paying a 45%.
And I think another point we mentioned was if people are earning 100 to 150, but let's say they have a spouse or partner at home who's not earning, they should be allowed to transfer some of the income to their spouse. Like if it works with inheritance tax and it works for capital gains and you can transfer assets, why can't you transfer some income? It's another way to penalize people that are earning high. Like even in the US, they've got joint filing. And in the UK, you've got two people who could be going out and earning 50k each, and they have a much higher household income, much higher than one person that's earning 100k. So that's completely unfair. So it could incentivize if people are moving overseas. Typically, we see that there's one larger, like one higher earner in the family, like that's doing a lot better. If they can start to split that income in with their spouse and keep it within the household income total, they'd be much more likely to stay.
And it doesn't even need to be like transferring the full personal allowance. Like we know there's marriage allowance where you can transfer like a tiny bit of the personal allowance, right? But even if the government allowed to maybe say transfer 25%, 30% of the personal allowance, that would be, you know, that's something for a lot of people in that situation.
Yeah. I mean, I think you should be able to move as much income as you want. Yeah. If it's like your spouse, partner, same address, and you sign off like on the return, you should be able to, like if you're earning 125, you should be able to put 25,000 if you want directly to a family member who's not earning. So, because otherwise it doesn't make sense. As you mentioned, you start looking for reasons to not earn, or to leave, or you just don't work as hard, which then impacts the quality of the company, the work, the UK. Like if you're not incentivizing, that's why the US is really running the world. They incentivize like 13 million inheritance tax. They throw money at so many businesses. They have joint filing. They encourage investment. They charge you if you invest outside of the US. They really encourage hard work and to put back into the economy, whereas the UK doesn't.
That's a good point in terms of the US will charge you actually if you invest outside of the US.
Yeah.
Should the UK introduce something a bit similar or incentivize people to invest in the UK stock market, invest in UK businesses?
I mean, it's interesting, right? Because you say that stuff about the US, and that is correct, but you know, it's worth remembering as well that if you're a US citizen or green card holder, you're always going to be subject to US. You'll never get out of that system. Yeah, so if the UK goes down that route, do we talk about something similar? I think I quite like the idea of the fact that you can break residence from the UK, right, if you want to. You don't have to file UK returns. So that's something like, you know, worth considering on the US side. But
yeah. No, that's very true. That's very true. But I do think something needs to be done to double down investment into the UK. Like I know they have we benefited from it as a business, the seed enterprise investment scheme and the enterprise investment scheme, which is great, but it's extremely high risk for the everyday person to invest in a brand new company that has a tech idea. The chances are it's going to go wrong. There needs to be more incentive to go into the UK markets, let's say the FTSE 100. You should get taxed in a better way, or maybe no tax at all. Why tax? If you're putting the money into the UK economy and you're supporting your local businesses, maybe you should only pay capital gains if you sell it, potentially at a lower rate. But if you receive any dividends, any income, should maybe be tax-free. I mean, there's all kinds of ideas you could throw out, right?
And often that would be net income after tax anyway, right? Individuals in the UK would have earned that income.
Exactly.
They would have paid tax on it. They would have then invested it in the UK. It's all coming back into the economy.
Yeah.
And that should be withdrawn tax-free, or perhaps have a little bit of an allowance similar to the ISA. I know that they were flirting with the idea of a British ISA, but I think it seems to have been scrapped.
Yeah. I mean, the ISA is a great thing. I think that's another good benefit of the UK, like being able to invest up to 20,000 every year. And again, it hasn't increased for a long time, so it's not as much now. But the point is, it does incentivize some investment. But the issue is, you can invest worldwide in an ISA. So you could put it straight into the American market, which is what 99% of people do, because that's where the returns are. That's where you're going to make more money. Whereas if they said, actually, in an ISA, it would annoy a lot of people. But if they said in an ISA, you can only use it to invest in UK stocks, it would help with the UK economy, because people would say, okay, maybe I'll put at least 5 grand or 10 grand into the FTSE market, even at the lower level.
Yeah, it incentivizes investment in the UK.
Yeah.
And potentially as well have lower rates in terms of capital gains, in terms of dividends.
Yeah, exactly.
Instead of, I think at the moment there's that push towards taxing the unearned income more because it's seen as an investment, but at the same time that income has already been taxed.